A street boy rescued a man in an elegant suit who was about to fall off the bridge. But when the man returned the next day and knelt before the boy, the truth he revealed made the boy tremble. Malik's hands trembled as he dug through the trash bin behind the restaurant. His fingers were quick, scanning through crumpled napkins, bits of plastic, anything that wasn't food. The noise of bustling kitchens and clinking plates was muffled, the smell of freshly cooked meals wafting out to where he crouched. He pulled out a stale piece of bread, quickly checking if it was clean enough. Suddenly the back door slammed open. Malik jumped, his eyes wide like a cornered animal. The restaurant owner, a thick man with sweat marks under his arms, stormed out. "Hey, you little rat! Get out of here!" the man shouted, waving a greasy towel. Malik's heart raced as he scrambled backward, bread slipping from his fingers. He darted away, the man's curses fading behind him. The few people in the alley glanced at him but quickly looked away. No one wanted to be involved. He knew that looked too well, like he was something they wanted to pretend wasn't there. His stomach twisted in knots as he slowed down, now a few blocks away. He leaned against a brick wall, breathing hard, his eyes stinging. There was nothing for him there, just empty streets and empty people. The chill of the evening air settled in, making him pull his thin, ragged shirt tighter around himself. He was used to the cold by now, but tonight it seemed to cut deeper. Across the street, Malik noticed a small family through the window of a diner. A mother, father, and a little girl about his age, maybe younger. They were eating burgers, the girl laughing as her father made a face. Malik swallowed, but his throat felt tight. He couldn't look anymore, it just hurt. He turned away, rubbing his arms as he kept walking. He knew he had to find a place to sleep before it got too dark. The bridge usually had some spots that were quiet enough, away from trouble. Trouble liked the dark, and Malik had learned how to avoid it. As the sun dipped lower, Malik made his way to the bridge. The sky turned orange and pink, and cars rushed by, headlights cutting through the early dusk. He walked along the sidewalk, the river below dark and endless. He knew he wasn't the only one with a hard life, but sometimes it felt like he was the only one out here alone. That's when he saw him, a man standing at the railing, staring down at the water. The man's suit was neat, expensive looking, but he was leaning too far forward. Malik slowed his steps, eyes narrowing. Something was wrong. The man's shoulders slumped, his head hanging down as if the world had pressed too hard on him. Malik could hear the faint sounds of the river, the hum of the cars passing by, but it all felt muted as he watched the man. Malik knew what desperation looked like. He saw it in the mirror every day. Without thinking, Malik moved closer. His hands felt cold, his chest tight. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do, but he had to do something. He opened his mouth, the words catching in his throat before he started singing. It was barely more than a whisper, shaky and off-key. It was his mother's song, the one she used to hum to him when the nights got too dark, the one that made him feel like he wasn't alone. The man at the railing flinched, his head snapping up. He looked over his shoulder, eyes hollow and confused, like he didn't understand what he was hearing. Malik kept singing, stepping closer, his voice cracking but refusing to stop. The man blinked, staring at Malik, the tension in his body slowly easing. Malik reached out, his fingers brushing the man's sleeve. "Hey," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Come on, just step back, okay?" The man hesitated, then slowly stepped away from the railing. He looked down at Malik, his eyes tired and wet, and Malik could see the pain there. The man took a deep breath, his shoulders dropping as he looked away from the water. For a long moment, they just stood there. The man nodded, like he was saying thank you without saying it out loud. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his steps unsteady but deliberate. Malik watched until he disappeared into the night, the man's figure swallowed by the city. Malik let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned and walked to the side of the bridge, finding a spot against the concrete wall. He sat down, pulling his knees to his chest, the adrenaline slowly leaving his body. The night was cold, but he didn't feel alone, not right now. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes. He'd done something tonight, something that mattered, and somehow that made the darkness just a little less heavy. Malik woke up with a jolt, the early morning light casting long shadows over the bridge. His back was stiff from sleeping on the cold concrete, but he had learned to ignore that kind of discomfort. The sound of footsteps made him blink, his eyes adjusting to the brightness. Someone was coming toward him. He rubbed his eyes, squinting to make out the figure. It was the man from last night, the one in the suit. Malik's heart jumped. He tensed, ready to get up and run if needed. He didn't know why this guy was here. People didn't just come back. The man slowed his pace as he neared Malik, his hands raised slightly, as if to show he meant no harm. He looked different in the daylight. His hair was disheveled, his tie was gone, and his face had lines that looked deeper in the harsh light of the morning. "Hey," the man said softly, stopping a few feet away. Malik shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the side. "You remember me?" the man asked, his voice carrying a tired edge. Malik nodded slightly, keeping his mouth shut. His eyes watched every move the man made. He didn't trust people in suits. They were always bad news. The man took a deep breath, then crouched down to Malik's level. I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice cracking, "for last night." Malik shrugged, not sure what to say. He wasn't used to people thanking him for anything. Usually they just wanted him gone. The man looked down, his hands resting on his knees. You saved my life," he said, his voice almost a whisper. He looked up at Malik, his eyes searching the boy's face. "What's your name?" Malik hesitated. He thought about lying, but something about the way the man was looking at him made him change his mind. "Malik," he said, his voice barely audible. The man nodded. "Malik," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "I'm Victor." He paused, then continued, "Listen, Malik, I want to help you. I owe you." Malik frowned, shaking his head. "I don't need anything," he said quickly, pushing himself to his feet. His legs were wobbly, but he tried to look steady. He didn't want this guy's charity. He'd heard promises before, and they never meant anything. Victor stood too, his hands dropping to his sides. "Please," he said, his voice almost desperate, "just hear me out. I want to give you a place to stay, food, a chance to, I don't know, to have a better shot at things." Malik's eyes narrowed. He had heard those words before too, from people who never showed up again, from those who wanted to feel better about themselves by pretending to care for a few minutes. He shook his head. "Nah, I'm good," he muttered, stepping back. Victor took a step forward, his face crumpling with something that looked almost like pain. "Please, I'm not trying to trick you. I just want to help. You saved me, Malik. You didn't have to, but you did. Let me do something for you." Malik paused, his eyes fixed on Victor. The man looked lost, his eyes pleading, and Malik could see it again, the same look as last night. Desperation, loneliness. Malik shifted on his feet, biting his lower lip. He didn't know why, but something in him softened. He didn't trust Victor, but maybe, just maybe, he could give him a chance, just one. "Fine," Malik mumbled, "but I'm not staying forever, just for a while, okay?" Victor's face lit up, his eyes wide with relief. "Of course," he said quickly. "Just for a while, as long as you need. No strings." He gestured to the car parked a short distance away. "Come on, let's get you out of here. I'll take you somewhere safe." Malik glanced at the car, then back at Victor. Everything in him screamed not to get in, not to trust anyone. But he was tired of cold nights and empty stomachs, tired of running. He nodded slowly. Victor led the way, and Malik followed, his steps careful and slow. He kept his eyes on Victor, watching every move, his heart pounding in his chest. They reached the car, and Victor opened the door for him. Malik hesitated, staring at the clean interior, the soft seats that looked too nice for someone like him. "You don't have to if you don't want to," Victor said, his voice gentle. "It's your choice." Malik swallowed hard, then climbed in, his hands resting awkwardly in his lap. Victor closed the door behind him and walked around to the driver's side. The car started, and Malik's heart thudded in his chest as they pulled away from the bridge. He looked out the window, watching the bridge get smaller and smaller until it was gone. They drove in silence, the city passing by in a blur of color and noise. Malik felt out of place, like he didn't belong in a car like this. The seat was soft under him, and he wasn't used to it. He kept glancing at Victor, who was focused on the road, his jaw set, his eyes tired but determined. "Where are we going?" Malik asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor glanced at him, then back at the road. "My place," he said. "I have a spare room. You can stay there until you figure out what you want to do. No pressure." Malik nodded, not saying anything. He didn't know what to say. Everything felt surreal, like he was watching someone else's life play out in front of him. The car slowed as they pulled into a neighborhood that looked nothing like the ones Malik had seen. The houses were big, each one with a yard and trees lining the sidewalks. Victor parked in front of one of the houses, then turned to Malik. "We're here," he said, his voice soft. Malik swallowed, his mouth dry. He got out of the car, his eyes wide as he looked around. Everything was quiet, too clean, too perfect. Victor led him to the front door, opening it and gesturing for Malik to step inside. Malik hesitated for a moment, then stepped over the threshold. The air inside was warm, smelling like soap and something Malik couldn't name. He looked around, his eyes taking in the spacious living room, the plush couch, the framed pictures on the walls. It was nothing like the places he was used to. No peeling paint, no cracked windows, no noise from the streets outside. "You must be hungry," Victor said, his voice breaking the silence. "I can make you something, or we can order in if you prefer." Malik shrugged, his eyes still scanning the room. He didn't know how to respond. He was hungry, sure, but this place made him feel out of place, like he was intruding somewhere he shouldn't be. Victor seemed to notice the tension in Malik's body. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, "let's take it one step at a time. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. If you want to leave, you can. No one's keeping you here." Malik glanced at him, then nodded. He wasn't sure what to think. Victor seemed sincere, but Malik knew better than to let his guard down. Not yet. Victor showed Malik to a small room upstairs. It was simple. A bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the street. "This is yours," Victor said, "for as long as you need it." Malik stood in the doorway, his hands at his sides. He took a few steps in, his eyes scanning the room. The bed looked soft, the blankets folded neatly. He hadn't slept in a bed since he didn't know when. Victor stayed at the door, giving Malik space. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything," he said. "Take your time." Malik nodded, not looking at him. He heard Victor's footsteps fade away, then the sound of the door closing softly. He sat down on the edge of the bed, the mattress sinking under his weight. He ran his fingers over the blanket, the fabric smooth and soft. He didn't know how long he'd stay here. Maybe just a night, maybe a week. He wasn't ready to trust Victor, not yet. But for now, he had a roof over his head, and he was warm, and that was enough. Malik woke up startled, his eyes snapping open as sunlight streamed through the window. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. His heart pounded as he sat up quickly, the unfamiliar softness of the bed throwing him off balance. He looked around, his eyes taking in the small room, the dresser, the window, the clean walls. It wasn't the street. It all came back to him, the bridge, Victor, the ride in the car, and the offer of a place to stay. Malik took a deep breath, his muscles slowly unclenching. He was safe, at least for now. He slipped out of bed, his bare feet touching the cool floor. The room felt too quiet, and for a moment he missed the city's constant noise, the chatter, the cars, the far-off rumble of life. He rubbed his eyes and went to the door, opening it cautiously. The hallway was empty. He could hear faint sounds coming from downstairs, clattering dishes, soft footsteps. Malik moved slowly, keeping his steps light as he made his way down the stairs. He paused at the bottom, peeking into the kitchen. Victor was there, standing at the counter, a frying pan in his hand. He was wearing different clothes, jeans and a plain t-shirt, a far cry from the suit he'd worn before. He looked up and caught sight of Malik, giving him a small smile. "Morning," Victor said. His voice was gentle, as if he didn't want to scare Malik off. I hope you're hungry. I made eggs, or tried to at least." Malik hesitated, then stepped into the kitchen. He kept his eyes on Victor, watching his every move. "Yeah, I guess," Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor nodded, turning back to the stove. He scooped the eggs onto 2 plates, then turned and placed one on the small kitchen table. He gestured for Malik to sit. Malik walked over slowly, pulling out the chair and sitting down. The plate in front of him had scrambled eggs and a piece of toast. It wasn't much, but to Malik, it looked like a feast. Victor sat across from him, his own plate in front of him. He didn't say anything, just picked up his fork and began to eat. Malik watched him for a moment, then slowly picked up his own fork. He took a bite, the warm food filling his mouth. It tasted good, better than anything he'd had in a long time. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the clink of forks against plates. Malik kept his eyes down, focusing on his food. He wasn't used to this, sitting at a table, eating a meal that hadn't been scrounged or stolen. It felt strange, like he was pretending to be someone else. Victor cleared his throat, and Malik looked up. "So," Victor said, his eyes meeting Malik's, "I was thinking we could go get you some clothes today if you want, and maybe some other stuff you need." Malik frowned, his fork pausing mid-air. "I don't need anything," he said quickly. He didn't want to owe Victor anything more than he already did. Victor nodded, his face calm. "I get that," he said, "but you're here now, and you deserve to have some things of your own. It's not a handout, Malik. It's just what people do. They help each other out." Malik didn't respond. He wasn't sure what to say. He'd never had anyone just want to help him before. It didn't make sense. People always wanted something in return. He looked down at his plate, poking at the eggs with his fork. Victor watched him for a moment, then sighed. "Look, I know you don't trust me, and that's okay. I get it," he said. "But I promise you, Malik, I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to ask for anything in return. I just want to make sure you're okay." Malik swallowed, his throat feeling tight. He wanted to believe Victor, but it was hard. He'd spent so many years learning not to trust anyone. He looked up at Victor, his eyes wary. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Why do you care?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. He put his fork down, his eyes meeting Malik's. "Because," he said, his voice thick, "because you saved me, Malik. You didn't know me, but you still saved me, and I know what it feels like to be alone. I don't want you to feel like that anymore." Malik looked away, his chest tightening. He didn't know how to respond. The words made something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He took a deep breath, then nodded slightly. "Okay," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We can go." Victor smiled, relief washing over his face. "Great," he said. "Finish your breakfast and then we'll head out. No rush." Malik nodded, picking up his fork again. He ate slowly, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what today would bring, but he was willing to give Victor a chance, just one chance. He still didn't trust him, not completely, but he was tired of running. Maybe, just maybe, this could be different. After they finished eating, Victor took the plates to the sink, rinsing them off. Malik stood awkwardly by the table, unsure of what to do. He wasn't used to this. Someone cleaning up after him, someone caring if he was okay. He shoved his hands in his pockets, his eyes darting around the kitchen. "Ready?" Victor asked, drying his hands on a towel. Malik nodded, following Victor out the door. They got into the car, and Malik stared out the window as Victor started the engine. The neighborhood slipped past them, the houses and trees blending together. Malik felt his stomach twist. He wasn't sure where they were going, and he hated not knowing. But he kept his eyes on the passing scenery, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in his chest. They pulled up to a small store, the kind Malik had never been in before. Victor got out, and Malik followed, his feet feeling heavy as he stepped onto the sidewalk. He looked up at the store, his throat tightening. Victor put a hand on his shoulder, his grip gentle. "It's okay," Victor said, his voice calm. "We'll just get what you need. Nothing more, nothing less." Malik nodded, swallowing hard. He followed Victor inside, the warmth of the store wrapping around him. The air smelled like new fabric and detergent, and Malik felt out of place. Victor led him to the clothing section, pointing out a few racks. "Take your time," Victor said. "Pick whatever you like." Malik hesitated, his eyes scanning the racks of clothes. He'd never had new clothes before. Everything he wore had been found, given away, or stolen. He reached out, his fingers brushing over a soft sweatshirt. It felt strange to touch something that wasn't falling apart. Victor stayed back, giving Malik space as he looked through the clothes. Malik picked out a few things, a couple of shirts, some jeans, socks. He kept it simple, only grabbing what he thought he needed. He didn't want to take more than he deserved. He turned back to Victor, holding the small pile of clothes. "Is this okay?" Malik asked, his voice uncertain. Victor smiled, nodding. "That's perfect," he said. "Let's get you some shoes too, all right?" Malik followed Victor to another aisle, and they picked out a pair of sneakers. Malik tried them on, his feet feeling strange in shoes that actually fit. Victor paid for everything, and Malik watched, still half expecting Victor to turn around and ask for something in return. But he didn't. He just smiled, handing Malik the bags. "Let's get out of here," Victor said, leading the way back to the car. They drove back in silence, Malik holding the bags on his lap. He looked down at the clothes, his chest tight. He didn't know why Victor was doing this, but for now, he decided not to question it. He would just take things one step at a time. When they got back to the house, Victor helped Malik bring everything inside. Malik went back to his room, setting the bags on the bed. He looked at the clothes, his fingers brushing over the fabric. It still felt unreal, having things of his own, having a place that was warm and safe. Victor knocked gently on the door frame, making Malik look up. "You okay?" Victor asked. Malik nodded. "Yeah," he said, his voice quiet. "Thanks for all this." Victor smiled. "You're welcome, Malik," he said. "Take your time settling in. We've got no rush." Malik watched as Victor walked away, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Malik sat down on the bed, looking out the window. He didn't know how long this would last, or if it was even real. But for now, he had a roof over his head. He had clothes. He had someone who seemed to care. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the small room. Malik looked at his reflection in the mirror on the dresser. The new clothes felt strange, clean, fitting properly. It was almost like looking at someone else. He ran a hand through his short hair, then shook his head, turning away from the mirror. Victor called from downstairs, his voice carrying up the hallway. "Malik, you hungry yet? I was thinking about making something for dinner." Malik opened his door, stepping out. He still wasn't sure about all this. Being in a house like this, having someone cook for him. It felt wrong, like any moment someone would tell him he didn't belong here. He moved cautiously down the stairs, one hand lightly skimming the railing. Victor was in the kitchen looking through the fridge. He glanced up as Malik entered, giving him a smile. "Hey, there you are. How do you feel about spaghetti?" Malik shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "Sure, whatever." He didn't want to say much. He didn't want to give Victor any reason to regret letting him stay. Victor nodded, grabbing a pot and filling it with water. He worked quietly, and Malik just watched. There was something calming about Victor's movements. No rush, no tension, just simple actions. Malik slowly moved closer, stepping up to the counter. He looked at the vegetables sitting there, carrots and bell peppers, and reached out tentatively. "You want to help?" Victor asked, glancing over. His voice was calm, without any hint of expectation. Malik nodded. "I guess," he said, picking up a knife and a carrot. He looked at Victor, waiting for instructions. Victor smiled, pointing to a cutting board. "Just slice it thin, like this." He demonstrated, cutting the bell pepper in even strips. Malik watched, then nodded, copying the motions. His hands were a little unsteady, but Victor didn't say anything. He just went on cooking, letting Malik take his time. They worked together in silence, Malik slowly chopping while Victor stirred the pot. The smell of boiling pasta filled the kitchen, and Malik felt his stomach rumble. It had been a long time since he'd had anything more than scraps. Victor looked over at him, smiling slightly. "You're doing good," he said, nodding at the carrot slices. "Better than me when I first started." Malik gave a small shrug, but his lips twitched up just a little. He wasn't used to compliments, but he could tell Victor meant it. He finished chopping the carrots and stepped back, letting Victor take over. "Thanks for the help," Victor said, throwing the vegetables into the pan. "This'll be ready soon. Why don't you grab a seat?" Malik nodded, moving over to the table. He pulled out a chair, sitting down and watching as Victor worked. He didn't know why Victor was doing all this. He could have just left Malik on the bridge, walked away, and never looked back. But here he was, cooking dinner for him, talking to him like he mattered. It didn't make sense. Victor finished cooking, bringing over 2 plates piled with spaghetti and vegetables. He set one in front of Malik, then sat down across from him. "Dig in," he said, picking up his fork. Malik hesitated for a second, then picked up his fork too. He twirled the spaghetti, taking a small bite. The warmth of the food filled him, and he found himself eating faster, the taste rich and comforting. He looked up, catching Victor watching him. Victor smiled, not saying anything. He just ate his food, letting the silence fill the room. Malik kept his eyes on his plate, but he felt something loosen inside him. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty, not like the streets. When they finished, Victor stood, gathering the plates. Malik got up too, grabbing his own plate and carrying it to the sink. Victor glanced at him, nodding in approval. "Thanks, Malik. You don't have to, you know, but I appreciate it." Malik shrugged. "It's fine," he said, rinsing his plate and setting it down. He didn't want to just sit around. He didn't want to feel useless. Victor washed the dishes, and Malik dried them, putting them back where Victor showed him. When they were done, Victor turned to him, his face serious. "Hey, Malik, I wanted to talk to you about something." Malik tensed, his shoulders going stiff. "What?" he asked, his voice guarded. Victor wiped his hands on a towel, then leaned against the counter. "I was thinking, if you want, I could enroll you in school," he said, his eyes on Malik. "You know, to get you caught up. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I think it might be good for you." Malik stared at him, his mouth going dry. School. The idea made his stomach twist. He hadn't been in a classroom since he was a little kid, and even then, it hadn't been a good experience. He remembered the way the teachers looked at him, like he was just another problem they didn't want to deal with. The other kids whispering, the way they avoided him. He shook his head, taking a step back. "I don't know," he said. I don't think I'd be good at it." Victor nodded slowly, not pushing. "I get it," he said. "It's a big step. But I think you're smarter than you give yourself credit for, Malik. And I'll be here to help, every step of the way. Just think about it, okay?" Malik didn't say anything. He looked away, his fingers gripping the edge of the counter. He wasn't ready for that. He didn't know if he'd ever be ready for that. But Victor's words stuck in his head, refusing to leave. He nodded just a little. "Okay," Victor said, his voice gentle. "No rush. You take your time. You let me know when, if, you're ready." Malik swallowed hard, his eyes still on the floor. "Okay," he whispered. He wasn't promising anything, but for now, he'd think about it. Victor gave him a small smile, then nodded toward the living room. "Want to watch some TV? Or maybe play a game? I've got a few old video games lying around." Malik blinked, surprised. He hadn't played a video game since, well, ever. He'd seen kids playing in shop windows, but he'd never had the chance. Sure," he said, his voice uncertain. Victor grinned, walking into the living room and opening a cabinet under the TV. He pulled out a console, plugging it in and grabbing a couple of controllers. Malik sat down on the couch, watching as Victor set everything up. Victor handed Malik a controller, then sat down beside him. "This one's pretty easy," he said, showing Malik the buttons. "We'll play together, okay? Just for fun." Malik nodded, gripping the controller. He wasn't sure what to expect, but as the game started, he found himself getting caught up in it. The bright colors, the sounds, the way Victor laughed every time Malik made a mistake. It felt good, different. They played for a while, Victor giving Malik tips, Malik slowly getting the hang of it. For a moment, he forgot about everything else. He forgot about the bridge, the cold nights, the hunger. It was just him and Victor, laughing and playing, like none of the bad stuff mattered. Eventually, the game ended, and they both leaned back, catching their breath. Victor looked over at Malik, his eyes soft. "You did good, Malik," he said. "You're a natural." Malik shrugged, but he couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his lips. "Thanks," he said, his voice quiet. Victor nodded, then stood, stretching. "All right, I think I'm going to call it a night. You good?" Malik nodded, standing too. "Yeah, I'm good." He paused, then looked at Victor. "Thanks for, everything." Victor smiled, his eyes kind. "Anytime, Malik. I mean that." Malik watched as Victor headed upstairs, then turned back to the living room. He looked around, the warmth of the house wrapping around him. It still felt strange being here, but for the first time, it didn't feel bad. It felt okay. He went back to his room, closing the door behind him. He sat down on the bed, looking at the clothes folded neatly on the dresser. He didn't know how long this would last. He didn't know if he could really trust Victor. But tonight, he felt safe. And that was enough. The morning sunlight slipped through the curtains, waking Malik slowly. He blinked, his eyes adjusting, and for a brief second he forgot where he was. Then it all came back to him. The house, Victor, the room that was his for now. He sat up, the soft bed creaking under him. He had slept well, better than he had in a long time. As he stood and stretched, he heard the soft murmur of voices downstairs. Malik opened his door and stepped out, following the sounds. He paused at the top of the stairs, listening. Victor was on the phone, his voice low but serious. "Yeah, I think it's the right thing to do," Victor said. "He's a bright kid. He just needs someone to believe in him." Malik's stomach twisted. He hated hearing people talk about him, even if it wasn't anything bad. It made him feel like he was someone's project, like he was just another thing for someone to fix. He sighed and started down the stairs, making his footsteps louder so Victor would know he was coming. Victor looked up from his phone call, spotting Malik. He smiled, holding up a finger to signal he'd be done soon. "All right, I've got to go. I'll talk to you later," he said, before hanging up. He set the phone down and turned his attention to Malik. "Morning, Malik," Victor said, his smile warm. "Sleep okay?" Malik shrugged. "Yeah," he said. "It was fine." Victor nodded, then gestured to the kitchen table. "I made some breakfast, cereal and toast. Help yourself." Malik eyed the table, seeing the box of cereal and the loaf of bread. It wasn't much, but it was more than he was used to. He nodded, moving over to grab a bowl and spoon. He poured the cereal, adding milk and sitting down. Victor watched for a moment, then sat across from him. "I was thinking," Victor began carefully, "if you wanted, we could start looking at schools today." Malik frowned, spoon pausing mid-air. "I don't know," he said, his voice tight. He had thought about it last night, but the idea of going back to school still scared him. The thought of walking into a classroom, of having everyone stare at him, made his stomach twist. Victor nodded slowly, not pushing. "I get it," he said. "It's a big step, but I think it could be good for you. You'd learn new things, make some friends." Malik shook his head, his eyes on his cereal. "I don't need friends," he muttered. He had gotten along just fine by himself for years. He didn't need anyone else. Victor sighed softly, leaning back in his chair. "I know you're used to doing everything alone, Malik, but you don't have to anymore. You're not alone now." Malik didn't respond. He just kept eating, his jaw tight. He knew Victor meant well, but he wasn't ready. He wasn't sure if he'd ever be ready. He finished his cereal, standing up and taking his bowl to the sink. He rinsed it out, then set it on the counter. Victor watched him, his face thoughtful. "All right," Victor said after a moment. "I won't push you. But if you ever decide you want to try, just let me know. No pressure." Malik nodded, turning away. He knew Victor was trying to help, but it just made him feel like he was broken, like there was something wrong with him that needed fixing. He walked to the living room, grabbing the controller from the night before and turning on the TV. He just wanted to distract himself, to forget about school and everything else. Victor stayed in the kitchen for a while, and Malik was grateful for the space. He played the game, his fingers moving quickly over the buttons, his eyes focused on the screen. It was easier than thinking, easier than facing everything that Victor wanted from him. Eventually, Victor came into the living room, sitting down in the armchair across from Malik. He didn't say anything, just watched as Malik played. The silence was heavy, but Victor didn't try to fill it. He let Malik have his space, and Malik was grateful for it. After a while, Victor spoke up, his voice casual. "Hey, I was thinking about heading to the park later. Get some fresh air, you want to come?" Malik paused the game, looking over at Victor. "The park?" he asked, frowning. He hadn't been to a park in years. It had never been safe, too many chances of running into trouble. Victor nodded. "Yeah, just to walk around, maybe kick a ball or something. It might be nice, you know, to get out of the house for a bit." Malik hesitated. He wasn't sure he wanted to go, but staying cooped up in the house all day didn't sound great either. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "I guess." Victor smiled, standing up. "Great. I'll grab a ball and we can head out." They left the house a few minutes later, Victor holding a small soccer ball under one arm. They walked down the street, the sun warm on their faces. Malik kept his eyes on the ground, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He wasn't used to walking like this, with someone without a destination. It felt strange, but not entirely bad. The park was quiet, only a few people scattered around. Victor led Malik to an open area, dropping the ball on the grass and kicking it lightly toward him. "You play?" Victor asked, smiling. Malik shook his head. "Not really," he said. He had seen kids play, but he'd never had the chance to join in. He had always been on the outside, watching. Victor nodded, kicking the ball again, this time toward Malik's feet. "Give it a try," he said. "It's just for fun." Malik hesitated, then kicked the ball back, his foot clumsy against the rubber. It rolled unevenly, but Victor didn't seem to care. He just smiled, kicking it back to Malik. They played like that for a while, back and forth, the ball rolling between them. Malik started to relax, his muscles loosening as he kicked the ball with more confidence. Victor laughed as the ball rolled past him, and Malik found himself smiling too. It wasn't much, just a simple game, but it felt good. It felt normal. For a little while, he didn't have to think about anything else, just the ball, the grass, and Victor's easy laughter. After a while, they both sat down on the grass, catching their breath. Malik looked around the park, his eyes taking in the families, the couples walking hand in hand. It all felt so far away from the life he was used to. Victor looked over at him, his expression serious. "You know, Malik," he said, his voice soft. "You deserve this. A place to belong. People who care about you. You deserve to be happy." Malik looked down, his fingers picking at the grass. He didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure if he believed it. But sitting here, with Victor beside him, he felt something shift. Maybe, just maybe, he could let himself hope. Just a little. Victor stood, holding out a hand to help Malik up. Malik took it, standing and brushing the grass off his clothes. They walked back to the house, the sun beginning to dip behind the trees. Malik felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that made his body feel heavy and his mind feel calm. When they got back, Victor made dinner, something simple, just sandwiches and chips. They ate in the living room, the TV playing softly in the background. Malik still felt unsure about everything, about school, about staying here. But for now, it was enough. Victor wasn't pushing him, and that made it easier to breathe. After dinner, Malik went up to his room. He sat on the bed, looking out the window at the street below. The sky was darkening, the streetlights flickering on one by one. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but maybe it didn't matter. Maybe he could take things one day at a time. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. He still felt like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for everything to fall apart. But Victor had been patient. He hadn't pushed, hadn't demanded anything from Malik, and that made Malik feel just a little bit safer. Maybe, he thought, he could give this a chance. Maybe he could let Victor in, just a little. He wasn't ready to trust completely, not yet. But he could take a step, and maybe that was enough. The next morning, Malik was up before the sun. He hadn't been able to sleep much. The idea of school had been sitting in the back of his mind, gnawing at him. He wasn't sure if he could do it, wasn't sure if he wanted to. But there was something about the way Victor had talked about it, something that made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, he could handle it. Victor was already up when Malik came downstairs. He was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of him, his eyes tired but alert. He looked up as Malik entered, a small smile spreading across his face. "Morning, Malik," he said. "Morning," Malik replied, his voice quiet. He grabbed a slice of bread from the counter, nibbling on it as he sat down across from Victor. He hesitated, then took a breath. "About the school thing," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Victor set his coffee down, his eyes meeting Malik's. He didn't say anything, just nodded for Malik to go on. Malik looked down at the table, his fingers tracing the wood grain. "Maybe I could try," he said slowly. "I mean, I don't know if I can, but I could try. Victor's face lit up, a big smile spreading across his face. You want to try? He asked, his voice filled with surprise and hope. Malik shrugged, not looking up. I guess, he said. I mean, I don't want to promise anything, but if you think it could help, I could give it a shot. Victor nodded, his smile still in place. Of course, Malik. That's all I'm asking, just to try. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay too. We'll figure it out together. He paused, then added softly, I'm proud of you for even considering it. Malik felt something tighten in his chest at those words. He wasn't used to people being proud of him. He just nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Victor reached across the table, giving Malik's shoulder a light squeeze before standing. All right, Victor said, his voice a little more cheerful now. How about we go down to the school today and see what we need to do to get you enrolled? We can take it one step at a time. Malik nodded, his stomach flipping with nerves. It was happening. He was really doing this. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew Victor would be there, and that made it a little easier. Later that morning, they drove to the school. Malik sat in the passenger seat, his hands clenched in his lap. He watched the streets pass by, the houses and shops blurring together. He felt like he was going to throw up. The idea of walking into a school again, of facing teachers and other kids, it made his chest tight, his throat dry. Victor glanced over at him as they pulled into the parking lot. He gave Malik a reassuring smile. It's going to be okay, Malik. I'll be with you the whole time. We're just going to talk to the principal, see what we need to do. No pressure. Malik nodded, his mouth too dry to speak. He got out of the car, following Victor up the steps to the school. It was a small building, nothing fancy, but to Malik it felt huge. He kept his eyes on the ground, his feet dragging as they walked through the doors. The office was quiet, a few people milling around. Victor spoke to the receptionist, who smiled and directed them to a waiting area. Malik sat down, his leg bouncing nervously. He hated this, the waiting, the not knowing. He just wanted it to be over. After a few minutes, a woman came out of an office, smiling warmly. Malik? Victor? She said. I'm Principal Harris. Come on back. Victor stood, giving Malik an encouraging nod. Malik swallowed hard and followed, his heart pounding. The principal led them into her office, gesturing for them to sit. Malik sat down, his eyes darting around the room, bookshelves, a desk cluttered with papers, a window looking out at the playground. Principal Harris sat behind her desk, her smile gentle. So, Malik, she said, her voice kind. Victor here tells me you're interested in coming back to school. Is that right? Malik shifted in his seat, his eyes fixed on the floor. I guess, he mumbled. I don't know. Principal Harris nodded, her expression understanding. I get it. It can be really hard to come back after being away for a while. But we're here to help you in any way we can. We want you to feel comfortable, and we'll take things at your pace. Malik looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. She seemed sincere, her eyes kind. He nodded, just a little. Okay, he said. Victor smiled, his hand resting on Malik's shoulder. We just want to give Malik a chance to catch up, to see if it's something he's comfortable with. We're not in any rush. Principal Harris nodded, making a few notes on a pad in front of her. Of course. We'll start slow, maybe just a few hours a day to begin with, see how it goes. And if you ever feel overwhelmed, you can come talk to me, all right? Malik nodded again, the tightness in his chest easing just a little. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Maybe he could handle it. They spent the next half hour going over the details, when Malik would start, what classes he would take. Malik stayed quiet, letting Victor and Principal Harris do most of the talking. He just listened, trying to wrap his head around the idea that he would be coming here, that he would be sitting in classrooms again. When they finally left, Malik felt drained. It was a lot to take in. He followed Victor back to the car, sliding into the passenger seat. Victor looked over at him, his eyes gentle. You okay? Victor asked, starting the car. Malik nodded, staring out the window. Yeah, he said, though he wasn't sure if it was true. He was scared, terrified actually. But there was a small part of him that wanted to try, just to see if he could do it. Victor smiled, pulling out of the parking lot. I'm proud of you, Malik. I know this isn't easy. Malik didn't say anything. He just watched the streets go by, his stomach still churning with nerves. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. Nothing ever was, but maybe, just maybe, it would be worth it. The next day, Malik stood in front of the mirror in his room, adjusting his new shirt. Victor had insisted on buying him a few things for school, and though Malik had argued, he was secretly glad. He looked at himself, clean clothes, hair combed, and he almost didn't recognize the person staring back. He looked like someone who belonged, someone who could walk into a school without everyone staring. Victor knocked on the door frame, peeking in. "You ready?" he asked. Malik nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah," he said, though his heart was pounding. He grabbed his backpack, slinging it over his shoulder. He followed Victor downstairs, each step making his legs feel heavier. Victor gave him a reassuring smile as they walked to the car. "Remember, it's just for a few hours today. You don't have to stay the whole day if you don't want to, and I'll be right here to pick you up when you're done." Malik nodded, trying to steady his breathing. He got into the car, his hands clenching around the straps of his backpack. The ride to school felt like it took forever, every second dragging by. Malik kept his eyes on the road, trying to block out the nerves twisting in his stomach. When they pulled into the parking lot, Victor turned to him, his expression serious. "You've got this, Malik. Just take it one step at a time, and if it's too much, you just let them know, okay?" Malik swallowed hard, nodding. "Okay," he said. He opened the door, stepping out. His legs felt like jelly, but he forced himself to move. Victor waved as Malik walked toward the school, and Malik gave a small wave back. The hallway was crowded, kids rushing to class, lockers slamming. Malik kept his eyes down, his hands gripping the straps of his backpack. He felt like everyone was staring at him, even though he knew they weren't. He found the office, checking in with the receptionist, who smiled and handed him a schedule. Principal Harris appeared, her smile reassuring. "Hey Malik, ready?" she asked. Malik nodded, even though he didn't feel ready. She led him down the hallway, pointing out classrooms, the library, the cafeteria. Malik just nodded, his head spinning. It was all so much. So many people, so much noise. They stopped outside a classroom door, and Principal Harris gave Malik an encouraging smile. "This is it," she said. "Your first class. I'll be back to check on you later, okay?" Malik nodded, his heart pounding. She opened the door, and Malik stepped inside. The room fell quiet, everyone turning to look at him. Malik felt his face heat up, his eyes darting around. The teacher smiled at him, gesturing for him to come forward. "Everyone, this is Malik," she said. "He's joining us today. Malik, why don't you take a seat over there?" Malik nodded, quickly moving to the empty desk. He sat down, his hands shaking as he pulled out his notebook. He kept his eyes down, trying to ignore the feeling of everyone watching him. The teacher went back to her lesson, and slowly, the other kids lost interest in him. Malik took a deep breath, his heart slowly calming. It was just a classroom, just a teacher and kids and desks. He could do this. He just had to take it one step at a time. He looked up, listening to the teacher. Maybe, just maybe, he could handle this after all. The first day of school was hard, harder than Malik had expected. He had managed to make it through his classes, but it had felt like every eye was on him. Every word the teacher spoke was somehow a spotlight on his lack of experience. Malik had barely spoken, had kept his head down, and felt like he was struggling just to keep up. By the end of the day, his head was pounding. Victor was waiting for him outside the school, standing near the car with a hopeful smile. When he saw Malik, Victor's face lit up. He gave Malik a thumbs up. "Hey, how'd it go?" Malik shrugged, trying to muster a smile, but it felt forced. He wanted to say it was fine, but the truth was he felt exhausted. He got into the car, dropping his backpack onto the floor and slumping back against the seat. Victor looked over at him as they pulled out of the parking lot, his voice soft. "Rough day, huh?" Malik swallowed, nodding. He didn't want to talk about it. His chest felt tight, like the failure of the day was pressing down on him, suffocating him. He stared out the window, the world blurring past. Victor didn't push, just nodded. "That's all right, Malik. The first day's always tough. We'll take it one step at a time, okay?" Malik nodded again, not looking at Victor. His eyes stung, and he blinked quickly, not wanting Victor to see. He felt stupid. Stupid for thinking he could do this. Stupid for wanting to fit in, for thinking he could be like everyone else. When they got back to the house, Malik went straight to his room, closing the door behind him. He dropped his bag on the floor, then sat down on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He was frustrated, angry at himself for not being better, for not knowing the answers in class, for feeling so out of place. A soft knock came at the door, and Malik looked up, his breath hitching. "Yeah," he called, his voice hoarse. Victor opened the door, peeking in. "Hey," he said, "I know today was rough, but I want you to know I'm proud of you, just for showing up. That takes courage, Malik." Malik shook his head, looking away. "It doesn't feel like enough," he muttered. "I felt dumb, like I didn't belong there." Victor stepped inside, sitting down in the chair by the window. "I get that," he said quietly. "I really do. But you do belong there, Malik. You belong anywhere you want to be. It's just going to take some time, and I'm here no matter how long it takes." Malik didn't say anything, his eyes fixed on the floor. He wanted to believe Victor, but it was hard. He'd spent so long feeling like he didn't belong anywhere. It wasn't easy to shake that feeling off. Victor sighed softly. "I know it's not easy, Malik, and I'm not going to pretend that it is. But I want you to remember that you're not alone anymore. You don't have to do this by yourself." Malik looked up at Victor, his chest aching. He nodded, though he still felt uncertain. "Okay," he whispered. Victor smiled, standing up. "How about we go grab something to eat? You pick. We can go anywhere you want." Malik thought for a moment, then shrugged. "Pizza, maybe," he said, his voice still soft. Victor grinned. "Pizza it is. Come on, let's get out of here for a bit." The next few days went by in a blur. Malik went back to school, but each day felt like a new struggle. He was behind in almost every subject, and the other kids seemed to know it too. They whispered to each other, their eyes following him as he walked down the hallway. He tried to ignore it, but it was hard not to notice. On Thursday, Malik had his first real setback. He had been sitting in math class trying to follow the teacher's explanation of something called quadratic equations. It made no sense to him. The numbers and letters blurred together on the page, and he could feel the frustration building in his chest. The teacher called on him to solve a problem on the board. Malik stood up, his knees shaky as he walked to the front of the room. He picked up the marker, staring at the problem. He had no idea where to start. He could hear the other kids whispering, stifling laughs. His face burned, his hands shaking as he tried to write something, anything that looked like an answer. "All right, Malik," the teacher said gently. "Why don't you take a seat? We can go over this together later." Malik put the marker down, his eyes on the floor. He turned and walked back to his seat, his face hot with embarrassment. He sat down, his hands clenched in his lap, his heart pounding. He felt stupid, like everyone else knew he didn't belong there. When the bell rang, Malik grabbed his bag and hurried out of the classroom. He kept his head down, pushing his way through the crowded hallway, not stopping until he was outside, away from the noise and the stares. He leaned against the wall, his breath coming in short gasps. He wanted to run. He wanted to leave and never come back. He didn't belong here, and he was tired of pretending that he did. When Victor picked him up that afternoon, he could tell something was wrong. Malik got in the car, slamming the door shut, his face set in a scowl. Victor glanced at him, his brow furrowed. "Rough day?" Victor asked carefully. Malik didn't answer. He just stared out the window, his jaw tight. He could feel the anger and frustration boiling inside him, and he didn't want to talk about it. Not with Victor, not with anyone. Victor was quiet for a while, then spoke up again, his voice gentle. "You know, Malik, it's okay to have bad days. It doesn't mean you're not doing well. It just means it's hard. And that's okay." Malik clenched his teeth, his hands balling into fists. "It doesn't matter," he muttered. "I don't belong there." Victor pulled the car over to the side of the road, turning to face Malik. "Listen to me, Malik," he said, his voice serious. "You do belong there. You're just as smart as anyone else in that school. You've had it harder than most of them, but that doesn't mean you can't catch up. And I'm going to be here to help you, every step of the way." Malik shook his head, tears stinging his eyes. "I don't want to keep trying if I'm just going to fail," he whispered. Victor's face softened, and he reached over, placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. "Malik, you're not failing. You're learning. And learning takes time, it takes mistakes, and it takes hard days. But you're not alone. I'm not going anywhere, okay? Malik swallowed hard, blinking back the tears. He nodded, even though it still hurt. He didn't want to feel like this, like he wasn't good enough, like he couldn't do it. But Victor's words made something in him loosen, just a little. Victor pulled back onto the road, his voice gentle. We'll take it one day at a time, Malik. And if there are things you're struggling with, we'll work on them together. You're not alone in this. That night, Victor helped Malik with his math homework. They sat at the kitchen table, the textbook open between them. Malik felt his frustration bubbling up again, but Victor was patient. He explained the problems slowly, showing Malik how to break them down. It was hard, and Malik felt stupid more than once. But Victor didn't get frustrated. He didn't make Malik feel small. He just encouraged him step by step until Malik finally started to understand. When they finished, Malik leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. Victor smiled at him, nodding in approval. See, you got this, he said. You just needed a little help. Malik nodded, his shoulders relaxing. It wasn't easy, and he knew it wouldn't get easier overnight. But for the first time, he felt like maybe he could do it. With Victor's help, maybe he could catch up. Maybe he could belong. Victor patted Malik on the shoulder, standing up. Come on, let's watch a movie or something. You've earned a break. Malik followed Victor into the living room, a small smile tugging at his lips. He still felt unsure, still felt scared. But he wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that made all the difference. They sat on the couch, the TV glowing softly in the dim room. Victor handed Malik the remote, letting him pick the movie. Malik chose something funny, something light. As the opening credits rolled, Malik looked over at Victor, who was smiling at the screen. For the first time in a long time, Malik felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't perfect, he wasn't there yet, but he was trying, and maybe that was enough. The next week, Malik began to settle into a rhythm. Each day was still hard, and the classes were challenging, but Victor's words stuck with him. He kept trying, he kept showing up, even on the days he felt like he was drowning. And every day, Victor was there, encouraging him, helping him with homework, reminding him that it was okay to struggle. One morning, as Malik was getting ready for school, Victor knocked on his bedroom door. Malik turned, pulling his new jacket on, and looked at Victor curiously. Hey, Malik, Victor said, smiling. I've got a bit of a surprise for you today, something I think might help with everything you've been going through. Malik frowned, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. What is it? He asked, his voice cautious. Victor held up his hands in a gesture of reassurance. Don't worry, it's nothing big. I just want to introduce you to someone. I think you'll like them. They're kind of like a mentor who helps new students adjust. I thought it might help to have someone else to talk to. It's totally up to you, though. Malik hesitated. The idea of talking to someone else, letting someone else into his life made him uneasy. But Victor had been patient, and Malik trusted him more than he trusted anyone else. He nodded slowly. Okay, Malik said. I guess I can meet them. Victor's face lit up, his smile warm. Great. We're going to meet her before school. Her name's Sarah. She's been helping out new students for a while now. I think you'll get along. Malik swallowed his nerves, nodding again. He followed Victor out to the car, the morning air crisp and cold. The drive to school was quiet, the usual nervousness churning in Malik's stomach. He kept his eyes out the window, watching the city blur by. When they got to the school, Victor led Malik to a small office near the front. A woman with short brown hair and a friendly smile stood as they entered, extending her hand to Malik. Hi, Malik, she said, her voice gentle. I'm Sarah. It's nice to meet you. Malik hesitated, then shook her hand. Hi, he said quietly. Sarah smiled, gesturing for Malik and Victor to sit. Victor told me a little about you, she said, sitting down across from them. I know school hasn't been easy so far, but I want you to know that we're all here to support you. You're not alone. Malik looked down at his hands, nodding slightly. He appreciated the sentiment, but he wasn't sure how much it would help. It was one thing to have Victor at home, but school was different. Here, he still felt like he was out of place, like he was just pretending to belong. Sarah continued, her voice kind. I know it can be overwhelming, especially when you're trying to catch up. But that's what I'm here for. If you ever need someone to talk to, or if you need help with anything, schoolwork, dealing with other students, whatever, I'm here, and I've got your back." Malik looked up, meeting her eyes. There was something sincere in her gaze, something that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, she really did want to help. He nodded again, this time with a little more certainty. "Okay," he said. Sarah smiled. "Great. Why don't we start by just talking a little? Nothing heavy. I just want to get to know you." Victor gave Malik an encouraging nod, then stood. "I'll leave you two to it. I'll be in the car after school, all right, Malik?" Malik nodded, watching as Victor left. The door closed softly behind him, and Malik turned back to Sarah. She was still smiling, her eyes warm and patient. "So, Malik," Sarah said, leaning forward slightly, "tell me about yourself. What do you like to do? What's something you're interested in?" Malik hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know," he said. "I never really thought about it." Sarah nodded, her expression understanding. "That's okay. Let's see. How about sports? Do you like soccer or basketball? Anything like that?" Malik thought about it for a moment. He had never really had the chance to play sports, but he remembered kicking the ball around with Victor in the park. It had been fun, in a way that surprised him. "I guess soccer's okay," he said. Sarah smiled. "Soccer, huh? That's a good one. We've got a small soccer club here, actually. If you're interested, I could introduce you to the coach. No pressure, just to see if it's something you'd like." Malik blinked, the idea catching him off guard. Joining a club, playing on a team, he had never even considered it. But maybe it could be a way to feel like he fit in, to be a part of something, instead of always feeling like an outsider. "Maybe," Malik said slowly. "I don't know if I'm good enough, though." Sarah shook her head. "It's not about being the best, Malik. It's about trying, having fun, and being part of a team. No one's expecting you to be perfect." Malik thought about it, then nodded. "Okay," he said. "I guess I could try." Sarah smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's the spirit. I'll talk to the coach and set it up. In the meantime, I want you to remember something, Malik. You belong here. You have just as much right to be here as anyone else, and I'm going to help you see that." Malik looked at her, something shifting in his chest. He nodded, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Thanks," he said. The next few days felt a little different. Malik still struggled, still found the classes hard, but knowing that Sarah was there, that she had his back, made it a little easier to breathe. She checked in with him every day, asking about his classes, offering to help with homework. She didn't push, didn't demand anything from him. She just made it clear that she cared. And slowly, Malik found himself opening up. He started to let her in, to trust her. It wasn't easy, but it felt good to have someone at school who was on his side, someone who understood what he was going through. One afternoon, Sarah introduced Malik to the soccer coach, a tall man with a kind smile. Coach Thompson shook Malik's hand, his grip firm but friendly. "So, Sarah tells me you're interested in joining the club," he said, his voice warm. "We'd love to have you, Malik. It's all about having fun and getting to know each other. No pressure, all right?" Malik nodded, his stomach flipping with nerves. "Okay," he said. "I'll try." Coach Thompson smiled. "That's all we ask. We practice after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Come by when you're ready and we'll get you started." Malik nodded, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he was willing to try. And that felt like a big step. The first soccer practice was nerve-wracking. Malik showed up in the field behind the school, his heart pounding. The other kids were already there, laughing and kicking the ball around. Malik hung back, unsure of where he fit in. Coach Thompson spotted him and waved him over. "Hey, Malik, glad you could make it. Come on, let's get you warmed up." Malik joined the group, his hands shaking as he stood in line for drills. The other kids didn't seem to notice him much. They were too busy laughing and shouting to each other. It was a small relief, not being the center of attention. As they started the drills, Malik struggled at first. His feet felt awkward, his movements clumsy, but Coach Thompson was patient, showing him the basics, encouraging him when he made mistakes. Slowly, Malik began to find his rhythm. He wasn't perfect, but he could feel himself getting better, little by little. By the end of practice, Malik was sweaty and tired, but there was a smile on his face. He had done it. He had shown up, and he hadn't quit, and that felt like a victory. Coach Thompson clapped him on the shoulder as they finished up. "You did great today, Malik," he said. "Keep it up, all right?" Malik nodded, his smile widening. "Thanks, Coach," he said. As he walked home that evening, Malik felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. He had faced his fears, had tried something new, and he hadn't failed. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time he felt like maybe he was finding his place, like maybe he could belong. Victor was waiting for him at the house, his face lighting up as Malik walked in. "Hey, how'd it go?" Victor asked, his voice filled with excitement. Malik grinned, setting his bag down. "It was good," he said. I think I might actually like it." Victor's smile widened, his eyes shining with pride. "That's awesome, Malik. I knew you could do it." Malik nodded, feeling warmth spread through his chest. He still had his doubts, still had his fears, but he was starting to believe in himself. Little by little, he was learning that he could do this, that he wasn't alone, and that maybe, just maybe, he really did belong. Victor patted him on the back, leading him to the kitchen. "How about we celebrate with some ice cream?" Victor said, grinning. Malik laughed, nodding. "Yeah, that sounds good." As they sat at the kitchen table, bowls of ice cream in front of them, Malik looked at Victor. He didn't say anything, but Victor seemed to understand. He smiled at Malik, giving him a small nod, and Malik knew that Victor was proud of him. And for the first time in a long time, Malik felt proud of himself too. The next few weeks were a mix of highs and lows for Malik. He was slowly getting used to school, learning how to navigate the crowded hallways, understanding which teachers were easy to approach and which ones weren't. Sarah kept checking in with him, her constant support helping him stay grounded, and the soccer practices were starting to become his favorite part of the week. He wasn't the best player, but the other kids had started including him more, passing him the ball, cheering him on. It felt like a small step towards something normal, something stable. One Wednesday morning, Malik sat at the kitchen table, his math book spread open, his pencil tapping against the page. Victor was sitting across from him, nursing his coffee while glancing over some work papers. Malik was trying to understand the equations in front of him, but his focus kept drifting. "Hey, Malik," Victor said, looking up. "You okay over there? You seem a little distracted." Malik sighed, dropping his pencil. "It's just this math stuff," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I don't get why I need to learn this. It doesn't make sense to me." Victor leaned forward, nodding sympathetically. "Yeah, math can be a pain sometimes," he said. "But you know, it's not just about the numbers. It's about figuring out problems, learning how to think through things. You're doing better than you think, Malik. Trust me." Malik looked at the page, then back up at Victor. He wanted to believe him, but it was hard. He had spent so long believing he wasn't good at anything, and now it felt like he was fighting against those old thoughts every day. "Maybe," Malik said quietly, shrugging. "I just don't want to keep messing up." Victor smiled, his eyes warm. "You're not messing up. You're learning, and that's what matters. Every mistake you make is just another step forward. I see how hard you're trying, Malik, and that's something to be proud of." Malik nodded, trying to let the words sink in. He took a deep breath, picking up his pencil again. "Okay," he said. "I'll try again." Victor grinned, lifting his coffee cup in a mock toast. "That's what I like to hear." That afternoon, Malik walked to the soccer field for practice. The sun was warm, and the field was already bustling with activity. Coach Thompson was setting up cones, and a few of the other players were kicking the ball around. "Hey, Malik," one of the boys, Lucas, called out. He waved Malik over. "Want to warm up with us?" Malik blinked, a smile slowly spreading across his face. He nodded, jogging over. Lucas passed the ball to him, and Malik trapped it with his foot before passing it back. It was a simple thing, just a kick, just a game, but it felt good. It felt like he was part of something. Practice went well. They worked on passing drills, then played a scrimmage. Malik found himself laughing, running alongside his teammates, the nervousness that usually knotted in his chest loosening. He wasn't the best player, but he was getting better, and more importantly, he was having fun. As practice wrapped up, Coach Thompson gathered everyone around, clapping his hands. All right, great work today, everyone. I'm proud of you all, he said. He looked at Malik, giving him a nod. Malik, you've been doing awesome, man. Keep it up. Malik felt his face flush with pride, a small smile tugging at his lips. Thanks, coach, he said. After practice, Malik walked home, the evening sky turning a soft shade of pink and orange. His legs were tired, but it was the kind of tired that felt good, like he had worked hard, like he had earned it. When he reached the house, Victor was waiting on the porch, a smile spreading across his face as he saw Malik approach. How'd it go? Victor asked, standing up. Malik shrugged, but there was a smile in his eyes. It was good, he said. Coach said I did well. Victor's smile widened, and he clapped Malik on the shoulder. That's what I like to hear. I'm proud of you, Malik. You're really making progress. Malik looked down, his chest swelling with warmth. He still had doubts, still had moments where he felt like he was just pretending. But slowly, those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. Slowly, he was starting to believe in himself. That night, as they sat down for dinner, Victor looked at Malik, his expression thoughtful. You know, Malik, he said, his voice careful. I was thinking, if you're comfortable with it, maybe we could look into doing some activities together. You know, just the two of us. Something fun. I think it'd be nice for us to spend some more time together, outside of the house. Malik blinked, looking up from his plate. Like what? He asked. Victor smiled. Well, I was thinking maybe we could go see a movie or maybe go to an arcade. Whatever you'd like. It's up to you. Malik hesitated, the idea surprising him. He hadn't really thought about doing things like that. Normal things, things that families did. He wasn't used to it, but he liked the idea. He liked the thought of spending time with Victor, of doing something just because it was fun. An arcade sounds cool, Malik said slowly, a small smile tugging at his lips. Victor's eyes lit up. Really? All right then, it's a plan. We'll go this weekend. How's that sound? Malik nodded, a sense of excitement bubbling in his chest. Yeah, he said. That sounds good. Saturday came, and Victor drove Malik to a nearby arcade. The bright lights and loud sounds greeted them as they stepped inside, and Malik's eyes widened as he looked around. He had never been in a place like this before, so full of color, laughter, and the noise of games beeping and whirring. Victor grinned, handing Malik a small stack of tokens. Here you go, Malik. Knock yourself out. Malik took the tokens, his hands trembling slightly. He followed Victor through the arcade, looking at all the different games. They started with a racing game, Victor sitting beside Malik in the next seat, both of them gripping the plastic steering wheels. Malik laughed as he swerved around a corner, Victor's car crashing into a barrier beside him. Hey, no fair, Victor shouted, laughing. You're too good at this. Malik grinned, his chest feeling light. They moved from game to game, shooting hoops, whacking moles, even a claw machine. Malik managed to grab a small stuffed animal, holding it up triumphantly as Victor cheered beside him. By the time they left, Malik felt a sense of warmth that he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just about the games or the fun they had. It was about Victor, how he had made Malik feel like he mattered, like he was worth spending time with. Malik looked up at Victor as they walked to the car, his heart swelling. Thanks, Victor, Malik said quietly, his voice sincere. For today, it was really fun. Victor smiled, his eyes softening. Anytime, Malik. I'm glad you had a good time. That night, as Malik lay in bed, he thought about everything that had happened since that day on the bridge. It felt like a lifetime ago, like he was a different person back then. He still had a lot of fears, still had a lot of doubts. But he was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different now. He had a place to sleep, food to eat, and someone who cared about him. He had a school to go to, teammates who cheered for him, and a mentor who had his back. And most importantly, he had Victor, a man who had given him a chance when no one else would, who had shown him what it meant to be part of a family. Malik closed his eyes, a small smile on his lips. For the first time, he felt like he had a future, like he had something to look forward to. It wasn't perfect, and there would still be hard days ahead, but he was ready to face them. He was ready to keep moving forward. And as he drifted off to sleep, Malik knew that he wasn't alone anymore. He had Victor, and that was enough. Whatever came next, he was ready for it. One day at a time, one step at a time, and that was all he needed.